afternoon to you. It's 4 o'clock in time for Sports4CLE. Thanks for joining us. Hope you had a good weekend. 92.3 The Fans. Browns beat reporter Daryl Ryder on a potential Myles Garrett trade because of that reworked contract.
Andrew Berry's in probably like the worst spot. You've already made the worst trade in NFL history, handed out the worst contract in NFL history, and now you're staring down the barrel of the prospect of potentially trading the greatest defensive player in franchise history, a generational talent, a future Hall of Famer, who, quite frankly, is sick and tired of losing.
Yeah.
Okay, because you guys have been bums for 30 years, okay? Yeah, you made the playoffs in 2020 and 2023, but outside of that, you have been bums, and I'm being very, very polite right now.
Browns haven't won a lot, but it doesn't seem like Myles Garrett's going anywhere anytime soon. All right, Andrew Berry, Browns general manager from the NFL owners meetings, talking about Deshaun Watson getting a chance to be QB1 this year.
Yeah, I'd say for us, the biggest thing that I mentioned a little bit earlier, our charge is to put the best team on the field, and ultimately it comes down to performance. Any player that we have on the roster, we expect to compete. That's what we can look for.
I don't see the benefit of playing Deshaun Watson as the starting quarterback. I don't think he would re-sign here. I could be wrong, just a sense. And the other thing is, 2020 was the last time he was a good quarterback. It's a long time ago. Miles Simmons, Pro Football Talk, with his thoughts about the Shedeur Sanders-Deshaun Watson QB battle on if Sanders can win that or does Deshaun Watson win the battle.
I grew up in Cleveland. I grew up a Browns fan, and frankly, I can't take my fan glasses off when I say that I just don't want to see that. I don't. I think we've seen enough of Deshaun Watson, and the Monken and new offense coordinator both kind of pedaled the line. Well, we've seen Watson play at an elite level before. That was in freaking 2020, man, the last time we saw that. How much everything is different now than 2020. 2020 is basically a generation and a half ago when it comes to NFL players. Like that, it's just, I'm sorry, I don't think it's going to happen. I think if that's the approach you're going to take, then you're better off basically just going all in on Shedeur Sanders and trying to see if he can really, truly be something, right? If you don't pick up a quarterback in the draft, then that's the approach you should take.
One thing that everybody's overlooking is Todd Monken has to win football games. Andrew Berry has to win football games. So if Shedeur Sanders doesn't look like he's ready to play, that's how Deshaun Watson becomes QB1. We'll have plenty more Browns. Pete Smith from the Orange and Brown Report, Tom Withers will join us in just a few minutes. Let's talk a little bit about Guardians. Guardians last night wrapping up 4-game series in Seattle, trying to make it 3 out of 4 over the Mariners. Emerson Hancock got the start for Seattle, and Emerson Hancock was pretty darn good. He goes 6 innings of no-hit ball, striking out 9 and walking just 1. Guardians finished the ball game with just 2 hits as Hancock kind of handcuffing everybody. 4th inning, Brendan Donovan with 2 on, and this one gets out. A 3-run homer to make it 4-0 Mariners in the 4th. 5th inning, Randy Arozarena. That one is going to get into the gap. RBI double, 5-0 Mariners. In the 5th inning, Mariners at it again. Luke Raley from Medina hits one, and this one going to drop in. It'll go as an RBI single, 6-0 Mariners. They add on another in the 6th inning as it's Cal Raleigh who had an RBI double. Mariners win it 8-0. Guardians open up a 3-game series against the Dodgers tonight in Los Angeles. Parker Messick gets the start against Roki Sasaki for the Dodgers. All right, let's turn our attention to the Cavaliers. NBA, ESPN's national NBA analyst, Brian Windhorst. Observations about the Cavs making a potential deep playoff run.
You can beat your chest and say, this team's not good enough, they're soft or whatever. I'm telling you, if you take that position, you can be made a fool of. because this team doesn't always play that way. Sometimes they play very strongly and they have the ability to do it. If you say this team has arrived, Harden's going to carry him, Donovan's going to average 38 in the playoff series, they're going to roll through these, you can be made a fool of. You can be embarrassed. They can get into a playoff series where they get pushed around. That's the conundrum and the paradox that this team has become. And so when you ask me, how far are the Cavs going to go? What do you think? I have to look at you square in the eye and go, I don't know. And I'm not saying I don't know because I'm an idiot. I say I don't know because I've watched this team in depth and talked to a lot of people about this team, and it's very hard to predict what they're doing. And that's not where you want to be. You want to know what your team is, but they're not there, and that's discomforting.
Yeah, I mean, the floor is pretty low for the Cavs. Ceiling's pretty high. The problem is that they're just not consistent enough rebounding and on the defensive end. And defense gets ratcheted up in the playoffs, so scoring isn't going to be as easy as it is. It's going to be an interesting dilemma for the Cavs come playoff time. We're going to step aside, take a quick timeout. Tom Withers is up first. We're talking Browns when Sports for CLE continues. Stay with us.
You got so much to do, it's got you feeling blue. Put a little play in your day, 'cause it's fun all over the state. So come on, great games wait for you and me. The Ohio Lottery. Put a little play in your day. Put a little play in your day.
Browns are up first on Sports for CLE. Andrew Berry at the owners' meeting was asked about redoing Myles Garrett's contract.
Can you address what was the impetus behind the Myles Garrett contract modifications? And then also, of course, the corollary to that is everybody thinks you're going to trade him. So if you could talk about those two issues.
Yeah. So I think you guys know, like standard practice, I don't comment on player contracts. I guess probably the easiest thing to say is if we wanted to trade Myles, we wouldn't have needed to make a contract adjustment. So it doesn't have anything to do with that.
Why did you do it?
So again, I don't comment on player contracts. I understand the question and the interest, but it's just something that we've always felt not to comment on player contracts or contract management strategy.
So can you state unequivocally that you're not trading Myles Garrett?
I'd say this, Mary Kay. Myles is a career Brown. He is one of the faces of our organization. I think we've been very clear, both past and present, in terms of our feelings on that. So I understand all the questions. I'll be honest, I don't really want to waste a ton more breath on the topic.
With that, let's welcome in Tom Withers, a longtime Cleveland reporter. Tom, what do you make of, seems to be a little bit of much ado about nothing, but what do you make of Andrew Berry's answers to those questions?
Dave, are we really talking about a potential for a Myles Garrett trade again? Here we go, right? I find, with Andrew Berry and sometimes with some of the other front office people that I've dealt with in town over the years, it's what they don't say that sometimes has more importance than what they do say. So, while he was adamant, he wasn't really adamant about not trading him, he didn't close the book on that either. I know it's impossible for him to answer Mary Kay's question about if, unequivocally he would not trade Myles, because all it takes is one phone call from a team that dangles 3 first-round draft picks out there, and you're on your way. So I'm not surprised we're back in this situation. Obviously, because it's the Browns, because it's Myles Garrett, because he made the trade demand a couple of years back, which obviously got changed when he got the contract extension. Here we are again, and I don't think this is going away anytime soon. It's been interesting to me too that Myles Garrett has been kind of under the radar, if you will, here for the better part of the last month. And so, you start connecting the dots on this, and when the Browns, because they are the Browns, coming off the Watson trade and coming off the Garrett situation, like I mentioned, this stuff is always going to trail them around. And, I thought Berry, again, what he didn't say means more to me than what he said out in Phoenix. He kind of danced around it a little bit. He tried to change the subject a little bit quickly, but, much like him, I understand and appreciate the interest in it because, in my mind, it's not going away anytime soon.
Yeah, and what you're getting at, he didn't say we're not trading Myles. He never came out and said we are not trading Myles Garrett, which, again, I can understand. People get excited about 3 first-round picks. The teams that you're talking about trading them to, how do you feel about 24? Because that's the type of team you're probably getting 3 late first-round picks. I get they're still first-round picks. You're not getting somebody that's a foundational piece, usually, under normal circumstances, that late in the draft.
Yeah, maybe. We don't know that, Dave, right? I mean, we've seen so many examples of guys taken, whether it's late in the first round or, in Tom Brady's case, the last, one of the last picks in the draft, or, Brock Purdy. There's plenty of examples. I don't have to tell you about all the instances in which, guys either dropped or, were undervalued and ended up becoming Pro Bowl and Hall of Fame players. So, it's interesting too, because they are the Browns, Dave, and because of the Watson trade and the fact that that trade is still kind of hovering over this organization. The Browns are in a position where they're still trying to play catch up, right? They gave up those 3 first-round picks in order to get Watson and are still paying the price for it. So, if the right deal comes along, which is why I think Andrew Berry, said what he said today, which is that he kind of moved on from the subject, but he can't close the door on it, Dave, because the quickest way to this rebuild, and let's be honest, this is going to be a several-year rebuild, is to acquire more assets, and that's with, playmakers and top players, and you typically get those through the draft, particularly where you're in a situation like the Browns are, which was that you're, limited with some salary cap space, et cetera, et cetera. So, like I said, I don't think this is going away. I think you're going to hear various machinations of a potential Myles Garrett trade right up until we get to the draft and beyond and into training camp. And, you wondered too, Dave, only because of Myles' history and the fact that he made that demand a couple of years ago to be traded, where's his head at now? How does he feel about this rebuild? There's potentially some of this stuff that we've been hearing over the last week or two because of Myles Garrett pushing for another trade. We don't know that. And I think it's going to be interesting to hear from him sometime soon and find out exactly where his head is at on all this.
So one thing the Browns have done is they've traded for some offensive linemen, signed some offensive linemen in free agency. Andrew Berry asked about the work he's done on the offensive line so far this offseason.
Good so far. Obviously, still a lot of work to be done. I think, as we look specifically with that offensive line group, good players, but also very versatile. And particularly like with Elton and Titus, both of those guys are players who can, play at a quality starting level at multiple positions across the offensive line. And that's super helpful because it really is a war of attrition with that position group. I think something like we looked at it as either 23 or 24 teams last year played less than 50% with their starting 5. Of course, we were one of them. And so to have that resiliency built into a position group where you have guys that can start all across the line of scrimmage, it's really important, in addition to the flexibility it gives you going into the draft.
Tom, what have you thought about? I kind of like what they've done on the offensive line, and I'll explain that in a minute. What have you thought about the guys they've signed to this offensive line?
Yeah, some really good players, Dave, and to Andrew's point, some versatility. And as we've seen over the last couple of years, and as Andrew just mentioned before, whether it's in Cleveland or Buffalo or Kansas City or name your team, you're going to have injuries on the offensive line, and you've got to be able to move guys around. And the versatility is the new model in the NFL when it comes to offensive linemen. They talk about swing tackles, guys that can play on both sides of the line. We've seen plenty of guys now that have played both guard and center, and sometimes have to move to tackle. I mean, just in the last couple of years, we've seen DeJuan Jones go from side to side. A kid like Whippler, who's going to be looked at as either potentially a starting center or potentially a guard this year. That's why the Browns drafted him a couple of years ago, because he can play multiple positions. And I think we've seen that with even some of the long-time guys we've had here in Cleveland. Joel Bitonio is a guy who could, virtually play anywhere on that line. So that's kind of the new model that teams are following. And I'm with you. I like some of these additions. I think you can pencil Titus Howard into that right tackle spot. And then, obviously there's some still some big question marks over there on the left side with DeJuan Jones and his sustainability and, bouncing back from another season-ending injury, what have you. It's still probably a position that the Browns are going to look at very closely in terms of the draft in the first couple of rounds. But by and large, Dave, I think they've done what they had hoped to do. Andrew Berry had talked a month or two ago about following that model of the Chicago Bears and how they rebuilt their line, which they basically had to do from stem to stern, just like the Browns are having to do. So, brought in some versatility, brought in some experienced guys. I think, obviously, whether they use the number 6 or the number 24 pick or wherever they end up picking in the first round, if they want to use that on an offensive lineman, that's also very possible. But for the most part, they did a really nice job of addressing, to me, the major need of this team going forward.
Yeah, and when you talk about a guy that can play multiple positions, that to me that speaks two things. He's pretty bright, he's intelligent, he has a high football IQ, and he plays technically sound. If you can play multiple positions, your technique has to be pretty good. The other thing that Andrew Berry kind of alluded to, they just had so many guys that were injured, and Elton Jenkins was really the only guy that wasn't always available for his team last year that they signed.
Yeah, that's a big thing. You're right. I mean, sometimes availability is the best quality you can have as a player, right? And it's interesting too, Dave. Just the rash of injuries we've seen to offensive linemen over the last couple of years across the league, and oftentimes it's just those accidental kind of roll-ups, right, where you turn in, you end up suffering a bad ankle injury or a knee injury, or in the case of DeJuan Jones, a season-ending break. Things just happen down there, right, in the trenches. But I think the Browns have done a nice job of addressing, like I said before, which was a canyon of a hole for them. They got a new offensive line coach coming in, actually a former offensive line coach in George Warhop coming back here, who's highly regarded. And I think Todd Monken, much like everybody who was here last year, understood right away that they got to fix, while the quarterback is still the most glaring hole that the Browns have, offensive line was certainly 1A. And again, kudos to them for taking it on this winter and getting themselves in a much better position.
You mentioned Joel Bitonio. Still no definitive answer on whether he's coming back or whether he's done. Andrew Berry was asked about Bitonio.
Joel's going to take the time that he needs to, make the decision for the next step in his career. And he should, right? It's a pretty big life decision for him. I don't think that we can operate under the assumption that he's absolutely coming back, because he hasn't said that space. And I do think that there's a little bit of an indefinite time period in terms of where he's going to make that decision, because it's a major one for a person, and we respect that and can appreciate it.
But is the door open? Do you still want him back, given, you guys obviously let the dead money kind of accelerate on your cap this year. So, and there might have been a way you could have maybe maneuvered that if you could have done it differently. So is it still the open door for him to return?
Yeah, I'd say the door's always open for good players. Certainly, players who've done as much as what that Joel has for the organization. But, ultimately it's his decision in terms of how he wants to navigate things before.
So again, doesn't think just listen to that. Andrew Berry doesn't seem to think Joel's coming back, but he probably has a trick or two relative to what he can do cap-wise should Joel decide he wants to.
Yeah, Dave, I'll be honest with you. I think one of the most overrated things that we discuss often is the NFL salary cap, because it is literally just piles of money that teams can move around, and they can navigate and manipulate, and there are literally hallways full of people over there in Berea taking care of such things. So I don't put too much stock in it. Now, obviously, it limits you from going after certain players and does put some limitations on you financially. However, in terms of Joel Bitonio, my understanding is that, Joel is at least, he has not made a final decision yet, as far as I know. His agent is obviously looking out there. If there's a deal that he can't turn down, then I'm sure he would take it. But I think he's leaning towards retirement at this point. Obviously, I don't have to sell anybody on what a a decorated career he's had here in Cleveland, what a beloved player he's been, not only to the fan base and the media, but in the locker room. He's been the consummate teammate. And as Andrew Berry pointed out, he's earned this right to kind of take his time with this decision. It's it's a tough one for him, only because Joel still played at a pretty high level last year, and he was able to come out of the year pretty healthy for a guy who's been through a lot. It reminds me a lot of Joe Thomas in his last couple of years. We were really unable to practice many weeks, but by the time Thursday night or Sunday or Monday night came around, and he had to gear up and get out there in the field, he was able to do it. And Joel has been no different. So he's been an Iron Man. I wish him well if that's the end. We'd love to have him back, but it certainly feels this way. Feels right now to me that we probably see the end of number 75 here in Cleveland.
Tom Withers and I are going to step aside, take a quick time out. We'll talk a little bit about the Browns' quarterback position when we return on Sports for CLE. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
We continue talking Browns with Tom Withers. Andrew Berry, Browns general manager at the owners' meeting, asked if the Browns plan to add any competition to the quarterback room as it's currently constructed.
I'd say, Daniel, that you always want to be flexible because you don't know how circumstances change or what opportunities come your way. Our lean would be, if we do add someone to the quarterback room, it would be someone who's a younger player, most likely. But I can't state that definitively because I don't know what the next couple of weeks will hold. Anyone that we bring in at any spot on the roster, our thought is that they are competing to play. They have something that we like in their skill set, and our expectation would be for them to work hard.
Not a whole lot there, Tom. Do you think it's going to be Shedeur Sanders and Deshaun Watson for QB1?
Yeah, I think as of right now, I do think they will draft a quarterback at some point, and I'm sure we can get into that as to where I think they're gonna maybe make that move. But yeah, I'll take Andrew at his word there, and it's trending in that direction. I think, the market out there right now, we've already passed, the idea of the Browns going out and get a substantial free agent to come in here and compete for the starting job with Watson and Sanders. So I think that's where we're at right now. It's kind of going to be a two-man competition. From what I've heard from a lot of people is that, Deshaun Watson has really impressed the Browns with how hard he's worked. It remains to be seen if he can get back to, close to where he was at one point with Houston, because he's not played at a high level for going on 6 years now, which is really hard to imagine. It's all going to depend, Dave, on what their plan is from an ownership standpoint as to what they need to get done in 2026. If it means winning games, then maybe Deshaun Watson gives you a better chance to win, 6, 7, 8 games. I don't know. I do think, and we've talked about this before, that Shedeur Sanders has earned the right to compete for the starting job, and I don't think he should be promised anything more at this point. Nor should he be given anything more at this point. So, it's hard to believe that they're in this situation, but this is where they're at. I still think like I said, I think they will take a quarterback probably within, the first 2 or 3 rounds, depending on how much they like Ty Simpson, depending on how much they like Drew Aller. I mean, suddenly you could see a guy that is already, earmarked as like a second or third round pick that vaults into the first round. Happens every year. I mean, we only have to look at last year to see that a guy that was considered to be the number 1 or number 2 quarterback on most people's boards fell to the 5th round. So anything's possible. But to your original question, Dave, I think we're at the point that number 4 and number 12 are going to be going at it. at least for the foreseeable future.
So you mentioned Shedeur Sanders. Assuming he gets the job and wins the job, what do you have to see from him to move forward and want to see more from him? What does he need to do? What does he need to improve on?
Yeah, take another step into what we saw him improve on last year, which is, not making dumb throws, not making, questionable plays, throwing the ball away when he needed to. There were times when he would do that. He got into a situation where, he threw just some terrible picks, Dave, where, he would take, or he would hold on to the ball too long and take a sack and suddenly, take them out of field goal range or whatever. Now, listen, it was a small sample size last year. It was only 7 starts. And like I said before, I think we saw enough to think that there is talent there. I'm not gonna deny that. I think the kid can absolutely play at the NFL level. It's just a matter in the Brown situation, a matter of whether or not you want to dedicate this season and more toward him. Is he your franchise guy? I don't think anybody has the answer to that right now. And as I've mentioned to you before as well, Dave, I think one of the big selling points for Todd Monken in getting this job was that he knows quarterbacks, that he knows what a number 1 quarterback in the league is supposed to look like. So he has a bar, and it's a matter of whether Shedeur can get close to the bar that Todd has set for him or not. So, you would hope that he would run the offense more efficiently than he did last year. You would hope, even before that, Dave, you would hope that he had spent this offseason working on his craft. And I know some of the knocks on Shedeur going into last year was that he didn't seem like this was that important. Not that it wasn't important to him, but it wasn't everything to him. And to become a franchise quarterback in the NFL, you have got to dedicate yourself beyond anything else. And I don't think that the Browns were, necessarily pleased with what they saw from Shedeur early on from that standpoint. So I think as long as he showed that maturity in this offseason, as long as he showed them that not only is he, thankful and grateful for the opportunity to get the job, but that he's going to seize it.
All right. Before we go to break, 2-part question. Browns are sitting there at 39. If Ty Simpson's there, do you think they take him? And if it's not Ty Simpson, do you think it's Drew Aller? We know, there have been a number of people who have reported Andrew Berry and the Browns really liked him last year. If he had come out, they probably would have drafted him, being Drew Aller. What are your thoughts relative to that young quarterback that you and I both think they're going to add to that room?
Yeah, I think both those guys are in play. I think Nussmeier from LSU might be in play there as well. There's going to be, like I said, there's going to be some other names that are suddenly going to start vaulting up because that's the way it goes in the NFL. In terms of Aller, I tell you what, much like Sanders, Dave, I've liked the progress that I've seen out of Drew over the last couple of years. It's, pretty well chronicled how badly things went for Penn State last year. But, I thought Drew was accounting of himself very well. He was putting himself in that conversation to be one of the top quarterbacks picked, before he suffered a season-ending injury. So, you're right. The Browns did like him last year. I was glad that he stayed for another year of college ball because I felt like he needed it. And then in terms of Ty Simpson, I'll tell you this, Dave. I watched more than a handful of Alabama games last year, and I was really impressed with Simpson. I thought he did a lot of things really well. I liked his composure. I liked him as a leader. It didn't seem like he forced too many balls. I think what happened to him last year was, because he's in the SEC and because they are Alabama, they ran into some pretty good teams. And so he struggled a little bit. His wide receiving room, they had some issues with that Ryan Williams kid, the young wide receiver in Alabama, some disciplinary things where he wasn't on the field, which took away, arguably Simpson's top target. But I like him a lot. And from what I understand, the Browns are taking a very close look at him.
Tom Withers and I are going to step aside, take one more time out. Other side of the break, we'll talk a little bit about the Browns draft, 624, what they might do, where the roster is. Sports4CLE, be right back.
You got so much to do, it's got you feeling blue. Put a little play in your day, 'cause it's fun all over the state. So come on, great games away for you and me, the Ohio Lottery. Put a little play in your day, put a little play in your day.
continue talking Browns with Tom Withers, Browns general manager Andrew Berry at the owners' meetings, talking about where he feels this roster is heading into the NFL draft.
We really like our core. And I think as we look at the team, we have an elite young defense. We have a really, rebuilt offensive line. We have, 9 picks this upcoming draft, and I think 7 are in the top 150, 3 in the top 40. We have a good offensive young core that we brought in last year. And honestly, as we saw last year, there are more than one way to generate assets in the NFL. So we'll always do what's best for the organization, but we feel really good about our roster right to head to the draft.
So, Tom, when you look at it, and you and I talked about this a couple segments ago, the offensive line being better should make the offense somewhat better. I still think you need a couple of playmakers, and Harold Fannon's a good player. Quinshon Judkins is a good player. You need somebody that opens up even more space for both those guys to be more of a threat.
Or do you need to add another defensive stud and maybe have the best defense in the NFL, bar none? I think Caleb Downs is going to be a fascinating discussion for the Browns at number 6, should he still be on the board. But you're right, Dave. I mean, they need playmakers galore, right? They need a wide receiver, and whether that's Carnell Tate or the Proctor kid Tyson from Arizona State, or Lemon from USC. I mean, they need a guy that, whoever the quarterback is, puts the ball in his hands and good things can happen. And the Browns they've lacked that the last couple of years. Let's be quite honest. They haven't had that guy. I mean, Jerry Jeudy has shown flashes, but he's not a number 1 wide receiver. So they've got to find that guy. Now, could he be a 1A Jeudy? Yeah, potentially, if you get the right guy with him. So there's going to be a lot of talk about that wide receiver spot. I think it's also, because of what the Browns did, Dave, in terms of the offensive line, I think any kind of a left tackle or guard at 6 is going to be a real reach, which is why, if I was betting right now, I think Andrew Berry ends up moving out of that number 6 spot, because I think there's going to be some teams that are going to be really willing to move up there to grab a guy like Caleb Downs if that's not someone that's interesting to the Browns right now. So I think you're going to see a flurry of activity, beyond all the Ohio State guys going in the top 10. I think you're going to hear about a lot of trade talks, especially with those picks, 5 through 8. And it would not surprise me whatsoever, as Andrew just alluded to in that clip you played, that there's a lot of ways you can utilize your assets in the draft. And, I don't think any of us last year going into the draft had them moving out of that spot, picking up another pick from Jacksonville, and then drafting a defensive tackle. I didn't remember anybody having that on their bingo card last year.
No, I thought it was offense, and then they doubled down and took a linebacker who ended up being Defensive Player of the Year. Relative, Andrew Berry was asked about trading out of that 6th spot.
I think it really just depends on the prospects that are available. I'd like to. Look. This is what I would say. I don't know that. I'll tell you guys this is, I don't know that we are going to be picking 6 at the end of April, and if we are picking 6, I have no idea what we're going to take this spring. And so, we try and remain flexible, as we go into draft weekend, and we want to use the asset in the best way possible. Whether that's sitting and picking, trading up, trading down, trading up for a veteran player. I know I said this last year and people thought it was just GM talk, but it really is the truth.
So let me ask you this, Tom. In your mind, what constitutes, a home run in the first 3 picks? So you got the 2 firsts, maybe even a third if you do the trade. But if Andrew Berry comes away with this, and this in whatever first 3 picks the Browns have, you think the roster is headed in a really good direction?
Yeah, to me, Dave, best player available at 6, and I am not stuck on got to have a wide receiver or got to have a left tackle at number 6. I don't feel that way. I feel like there's enough talent, available that they can go out and get whoever's the top guy on their board at 6. Go get him, because you need a lot of help. And as I mentioned earlier, Dave, this is not a 1 or 2 year rebuild. This is going to take some time. So much like what you said about the offense and needing playmakers, a playmaker can be on both sides of the ball. So get the guy that you think is going to help the Browns win, whether it's this year or in 2027 or 2028. Take the best player there. In terms of a dream scenario, I would think it would be landing, if you trade out of that spot, it's then landing whatever wide receiver you think is the best of the bunch, whether that is Tate or Tyson or Lemon or somebody else has moved up your board that you suddenly like. I've seen a couple mock drafts actually the last couple of weeks where they've talked about potentially a couple cornerbacks at 24. That would be interesting, not necessarily a place of need right now, but as Barry pointed out and as we saw him do last year, I think everything and anything is on the table for them right now, Dave.
Yeah, that's fair. I keep coming back to they haven't taken, Andrew Berry hasn't taken a wide receiver above the third round yet. And this is a passing league. Do you think that philosophy changes with Todd Monken as the head coach now? Because Monken a little bit different offensively than Kevin Stefanski.
Yeah, excuse me. Let me take a drink real quick. Yeah, I think it does. I think it has to. Not only is it a place of need, but if Monken's going to come in here and want to run the kind of offense that he had in Baltimore, then yeah, you're going to need, a bona fide number one wide receiver to pair with whatever kind of running game you decide to have. So, yeah, I think it's mandatory, Dave, that whether it's at 6 or 24 or 39, is it the third pick, that you take a wide receiver in one of those spots, because it has been a huge place of need. And as you mentioned before, Andrew Berry's track record has not been good with wide receivers, but I'll give him a pass only because what he did in last year's draft, which you could probably rate as an A+ at this point, was phenomenal. And so you would hope that the momentum of that, the trust that he has in his personnel staff, they identified the guys last year that were going to help the Browns win. And you got to hope that they're able to do that again this year, which is supposed to be, in many positions, including wide receiver, a better draft than was available last year.
Yeah, and I'm with you. The one thing I would say is I just want him to take one earlier. That's the only – do it in the first 2 rounds. It's the only criticism I have. Take one earlier and let's see how it goes. Tom, as always, great stuff. Appreciate you taking the time to join us. Thanks very much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Tom Withers, make sure you check him out. Always good and insightful coverage on all of the Cleveland teams, talking Browns with him. We're going to step aside, take a quick time out. We continue talking Browns. Pete Smith from the Orange and Brown Report straight ahead. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
We continue talking Browns on Sports4CLE. Longtime Browns beat reporter Tony Grossi talking about Myles Garrett, the comments that Andrew Berry made about Myles Garrett's contract. This from ESPN Cleveland.
Andrew Berry said Myles Garrett isn't going anywhere. Tony, do you believe him?
Where did he say he's not going anywhere? Never said that. That's the point. He didn't say he will not be traded. And maybe we're parsing words here, but if he would have said, guys, stop asking, he's not being traded.
Tony, they're backing up the Brinks truck right now for Myles Garrett.
So welcome in Pete Smith from the Orange and Brown Report. Pete, I know you wrote an article about not counting on a Myles Garrett trade, and Tony Grossi's right. Andrew Berry danced around it, but never came out and said, we aren't trading him.
Sure. By virtue of the way they adjusted the contract, it allows teams to make their best pitch. And what's interesting about that, I think part of that is this whole rule suggestion the Browns made about trading picks 5 years from now, which has already been shot down to the point where the Browns just basically took out the rule, which I do think actually hurts the likelihood of Myles Garrett being traded. My read on this ultimately is it's failure insurance. And part of this is based on the fact that, like, if you look at how the Browns did relative to the last offseason, you can look at the record and go, well, the Browns stink and they didn't get any better, so they should go ahead and get rid of Myles Garrett. Now, one, I think Myles Garrett can play for 8 to 10 years. I've written about this. I've talked about this. Bruce Smith, Julius Peppers, Reggie White, those guys played an insanely high level of football up to the age of 40, and Myles Garrett has never sustained an injury that has required surgery. And he takes incredible care of his body and all those things. But the other part about that is, like, if you just look at this last offseason, the Browns bring in Tyson Campbell, they bring in Malik Collins, they get Mason Graham, Quinshon Judkins, Carson Schwessinger, Harold Finn. Like, if you are going to look at the past year and go, the Browns did really badly, and they didn't get a whole lot better in terms of adding players that you want to build around, you would then sit there and go, okay, maybe trading Myles has a little bit more to it. But the fact of the matter is, yes, the quarterback is still a major question, but they can address the two big holes on their roster next month in left tackle, potentially, and wide receiver. So at that point, like, why would you then trade him? It seems to me more along the lines of, if for whatever reason they have a terrible year, they screw the draft, and all these other elements don't go their way, then maybe there's a point where they sit there and go, maybe it's time we had a real talk about this. But, like, just based on sort of where the arrow is pointing in terms of the building the roster, there's no reason to really actually pursue this.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. And again, people get all excited about the number of first-round picks. They're going to be late first-round picks. They're going to be 24, 25, 28, 29, 30. In all likelihood, you're talking about late first-round picks. Some news came out recently as well. A.J. Epinesa will not be signing with the Browns. They weren't comfortable finalizing the deal after getting a look at the medicals. So no A.J. Epinesa. Again, that was another guy that the rotation, he was intriguing as a rotational edge rusher.
Yeah, I mean, he has connection to Jacques Césaire, so I get from that standpoint, he's deflected a good amount of passes, but he is a power end, and they have a lot of those guys. And if the Browns found somebody in the draft they really liked, or somebody else sort of came out and outplayed him, I don't think he was a lock to make the roster. In fact, I sort of looked at him a lot like Joe Tryon-Shoyinka last year, where there was a scenario I could see where the Browns traded Epinesa, during roster cutdown time to get a pick like they did last year. I didn't love the fit. I get it from the strategy of Andrew Berry's whole thing of get the best 90, get the best 53. You don't know how injuries are going to work out, but I'm certainly not, like, overly brokenhearted that the Browns won't get Epinesa, because he hasn't been super productive in the areas they really need him.
Andrew Berry at the owners' meetings talking about how he views this wide receiving core of the Browns.
I'd say that we have a group of individuals that we like internally, that we're excited to see as they come back into the offseason program. I would imagine that at some point in the offseason, we'll add some external talent. But like I said, we're March 29th. We've got probably another 5 months in the heaviest period of the acquisition season. So we'll see where it goes.
How aggressively did you pursue veteran wide receivers and even veteran quarterbacks? And maybe why or why not did you pursue it aggressively?
I would not necessarily go into those details, Daniel, although I understand the interest. I'd say this. Our focus primarily was on the offensive line, obviously, going into pre-agency, while still maintaining an opportunistic mindset at some of the other spots.
So, again, I can't argue with they needed to rebuild the offensive line. I'm concerned that they overvalue their wide receiving core. It needs a couple of wide receivers.
I think they really need one really good one. Like, I completely understand the thought process of saying, well, just add a whole bunch of them. But if you look at the roster and you sort of break it down, Jerry Jeudy's going to be on this team, and he should be. And his contract looks really good right now. $17 million basically for the next 2 years is great. Cedric Tillman, unless they decide to cut him for the $4 million, I think that's a perfectly reasonable rate. They like Isaiah Bond. They like Malachi Corley. You just signed Tylan Wallace. And if you're sitting there going, well, the Browns need better special teams players, and you want those guys to make the roster, then that guy would theoretically take up a spot. all of a sudden, if you add a whole bunch of guys, then somebody's not making this team out of that group, and there are a whole bunch of people who go, I don't really care. These guys aren't that good, but the Browns might. And so, like, if they get that premium receiver, and by the way, that was about as tacit an admission that Andrew Berry is saying they're going to draft wide receiver as you're going to get. But, I don't have a problem with it. But this is why my sort of pitch to this whole idea was, if you get a premium wide receiver this year, I would then recommend you come back and do it again next year. Because at that point, Cedric Tillman's contract will have run out. Jerry Jeudy will be on the last year of his contract. Maybe you'll have a better indication of how you feel about Malachi Corley or Isaiah Bond, if they developed, if they haven't. And then you bring in another sort of higher end pick, like maybe a second round pick. So if you get a first round pick this year, second round pick next year, I think you're going to be in a really good situation, assuming you find the quarterback somewhere in that time period.
All right, so this is from PFF, best landing spots for free agents. They have Juwan Jennings, wide receiver, with the Browns. You got Rodgers, Steelers, Reeder, Colts, Deebo Samuel, Chargers, Joey Bosa, Titans. I'm not opposed to Juwan Jennings, I suppose. Big-bodied guy, seems to catch touchdowns. I don't necessarily see that happening, though.
Three things with Juwan Jennings. One, how much does he want? It seems like he wants a good amount. Two, health. He was talking about playing through like a ridiculous number of injuries last year. And the three, not that Shelby Harris is back, but I would be curious to know how the rest of that team feels about the potential of bringing in Juwan Jennings, given how he was received by the team last year, and particularly one Shelby Harris.
Pete Smith and I are going to step aside, take a quick timeout. Other side of the break, we'll turn our attention a little bit to the draft, as well as Todd Monken and Andrew Berry, what their thoughts are. Sports4CLE, be right back. Stay with us.
You got so much to do, it's got you feeling blue. Put a little play in your day, 'cause it's fun all over the state. So come on, great games wait for you and me, the Ohio Lottery. Put a little play in your day, put a little play in your day.
We continue talking Browns with Pete Smith from the Orange and Brown Reports. First draft for Andrew Berry and Todd Monken working together. Berry talked about what he has seen from Monken so far.
Todd's awesome. I think you guys have experienced it with your interactions with him. He's really smart. He's authentic. He's hired an excellent staff. He's great to work with, and I think we're both really excited to get going on April 7th when we get back. But I feel very, very strongly that as you all, our fans, continue to see him work and in interaction with him, that he will very much endear himself to his fan base.
So, Pete, here's a thought that I have. Is Andrew Berry's drafting philosophy altered now that Todd Monken is his head coach? In other words, Andrew Berry hasn't drafted a wide receiver before the third round. Now, some of that's because they traded first-round picks. Does that alter his draft philosophy?
It shouldn't, in terms of just the fundamentals of how the draft should operate, but wide receiver is a premium position. The Browns should be investing heavily in premium positions. The Browns did really well in last year's draft, but it's fair to criticize and say you got a running back and a linebacker and a tight end. And those are certainly good positions to get right. Any position is a good position to get right. But in terms of the money positions, quarterback, tackle, guard, wide receiver, corner, defensive end, those are the picks they need to hit. And if you're just looking at where the Browns are talent-wise, they need a whole bunch of them on offense. So relative to the fundamentals of the draft, I hope it doesn't change. But certainly in terms of, in some ways you can sit there and be very annoyed if you're Kevin Stefanski that you got sort of the short end of the stick in terms of offensive talent. But you've got a really good defense. You've got to give Todd Monken a shot here with offense, hopefully. I mean, if they trade down and take a defensive tackle, I guess, we'll have to deal with it. But they just have to get offensive firepower at some point.
Yeah, I'm with you. You need points. All right, let's head to the voicemail of Truth and Reason.
Hey, Dave. So this is my Browns 1 through 5 draft for the Browns if I had to pick. My first pick is going to be Carnell Tate, of course. Number 24 in the first round, if David Boston or Omar Cooper are there, I'm also selecting them. I want to be done with receivers. I want to have them for 4 years as rookies. Round 2, I'm going to Florida. I'm going to grab my left tackle, Austin Barber. I think he'll be fine. We just need somebody who can hold the line. Round 3, I'll take as a center either Brian Barker or Logan Jones. I prefer Barker. Round 4, I'm going to Georgia, and I'm going to get Oscar Delp, the tight end, so we can have matching tight ends on each side that can do what they can do. And then round 5, I'm going to Clemson, and I'm going to get Antonio Williams. He's going to be my return specialist. That's all I got to say for now. I'd like to hear what you guys got to say about that. Thanks.
As always, appreciate all of the voicemails. Pete, you've done a mock draft, an updated one. We'll get to that in a second. I have no problem with. I want a wide receiver at 6. You know my thoughts. If you like Carnell Tate, great. If you like Mekhi Lemon, great.
Look, I just look at the way this draft is constructed, and without a ton of blue chip talent, certainly you can look at Jeremiah Love, you can look at Sonny Styles, you can make an argument for Caleb Downs. Again, they're non-premium positions for the most part, which makes it tough. But like, I think the margins are pretty thin in terms of the premium position players. So to me, you can make an argument for a wide number of guys and be defensible in your pick. Now, I'm with you. My preference is Mekhi Lemon, then followed by Carnell Tate. But I'm not going to argue with either one if you get them, because they desperately need to get firepower. And those guys, based on the data and the film and everything else, project to be pretty good players. Like, Mekhi Lemon has the upside to be an all-pro. That's something the Browns could use. Carnell Tate has a promising profile that suggests he could get better with more volume. Like, yes, sign me up, absolutely.
All right, let's take a look at your 7-round mock draft, updated one. So at 6 overall, you've gone to the dark side on me, and you went Spencer Fano, tackle. Then you come back and get Casey Concepcion, D'Angelo Pons from Indiana. We'll talk about those first 3. First of all, what did you like about Fano?
I just love the way he plays the game. Like, for people who did not like watching Jed Wills, and not to just pick on him because there are a lot of linemen who do this, the guys who basically are shift workers, what they think is the start of the play to what they think is the end of the play, as opposed to whistle to whistle, and they just sort of shove a guy and stop. Fano's the opposite. Like, you watch him and you get excited about offensive line play. He just, from the start to the end of the play, he's just going after it as hard as he can. Athletic, he can get out in space and do all those things. Like, he's a real weapon in the running game, and I think he's more than adequate in the pass protection element. Like, for what I think the Browns are going to do as a backside cutoff guy, running zones and all those things, and being a second-level runner, I think Fano is the type of guy that just creates explosive running plays for an offense. So that gets you excited about that type of player.
All right, Casey Concepcion. The concern, yeah, I'm not thrilled with him. Now, the one thing I was mentioning to you, I saw contested catch rate is really good last year. The problem is the drops. Those two things don't seem to square. A guy that's really good with contested catches shouldn't have that many drops. Is it just like mental blocks with these drops?
There's 2 keys to why he drops the ball. One, he plays incredibly fast. So some of these are just the ball is just, it's on him, and he's trying to go so quickly he can't sort of haul it in. The other is the way he catches the ball. He does sort of this clapping thing, which drives people nuts and can result in some of the drops. The other thing you can sort of point to, and I'm not saying this is an excuse, but if you're somebody who looked at Jerry Jeudy in 2024 to 2025, I would attribute a lot of that drop-off to quarterback play. Well, if you look at Texas A&M and you get in the data and stuff, of all the receivers, like the top receivers in this class, the quarterback who had the most off-target throws and all these other elements, Texas A&M. It's Casey Concepcion. So it does not excuse anything, but Marcel Reed was not great in terms of being accurate, which can lead to some of these other things. But the bottom line with Casey Concepcion, 31 touchdowns in 3 seasons, a playmaker, returned 2 punts for touchdowns, and I can't think of another receiver who's got a better track over that time. And then I checked And the guy who's going to pass him next year, which shouldn't surprise anybody, is going to be Jeremiah Smith, who's got something like 28 touchdowns in 2 years. But there's a reason for that. He's probably going to be a top 3 pick next year.
So next guy, D'Angelo Pons from Indiana, is a guy that a lot of people really like. What do you see with him? How does he fit with what the Browns need?
Yeah, I mean, you look at him and you go 5'8" and change and 29 and change arms, and you're like, how can this possibly work? He's one of the most efficient tacklers in college football. He has been dominant as a man cover corner, and for a team that plays man coverage as much as the Browns do, that becomes really interesting. And you can slot him in at nickel immediately, and he can be a player there. And then the other part about this, which makes it really interesting and something I wonder if the Browns consider, I know they generally prefer guys with long arms, and they've specifically said 32 inches on any number of occasions. But eventually Denzel Ward leaves. A lot of people will be uncomfortable with this, but I would not hesitate to at least see if D'Angelo Pons can't survive outside, because he's just been that good.
All right, so we've talked a little bit about offensive line and the left tackle. Browns general manager Andrew Berry was asked about the left tackle position at the owners' meetings.
I'd say, between DeJuan, Titus has obviously played there before, was cause left tackle as well. We've had KT. So we do have options there, Tony.
Is it DeJuan an option, so I could potentially move inside, or do you view him restricted?
No, so him as it's strictly as tackle.
So it's interesting. We find out DeJuan Jones staying at tackle, and Titus Howard could play there. Sure seems like one of those first picks, be it 6 or 24, is going to be a guy that can play left tackle.
Right, it's an interesting thought exercise about the possibility, if you think in terms of Titus Howard as left tackle, what that sort of opens the door to do. Now, I'm more inclined to agree with you, and I think it's more of he's just naming names so he doesn't leave anybody out. But, yeah, I mean, Titus Howard has been telling everybody that he's playing right tackle. Maybe he's in for a rude awakening if the Browns change their mind. But it at least opens the possibility for the Browns to sort of play to their best interest. If they were to trade down or stay at 6 and they just look, we think Francis Mauigoa is the best player on the board and we want to leave him at right tackle because he's such an impactful run blocker, then they should change their thought process. But ultimately, I think they're going to end up with a left tackle, got somebody who's been a left tackle, whether that's Fano, one of the Utah guys, Fano or Caleb Lomu, could be Monroe Freeling, though I don't love that option. There's just a lot of guys. And then Barry later in the same conversation, he has the same thought process I do in reference to the idea that tackle is tackle. Everybody has to be really good at pass protection. It really just comes down to how do you want to structure your run game in terms of what side a guy needs to play on.
All right, so before I let you go, gut feeling, do you think, and we're still 3 weeks away from the draft, do you think they go tackle or wide receiver with that first pick, wherever it is, if it's at 6, 10, 12, wherever that may be?
My gut feeling is it will not be an offensive tackle. I'm not super convinced it will be a wide receiver necessarily, but certainly, if you're asking me right now, I think wide receiver is more likely to be the case than offensive tackle. Just the way the talent sort of bears out to me, I think the offensive tackles in this class are far closer together than some of the wide receivers. And I think the Browns are looking at this and going, if the tackles are relatively similar to how we sort of stack them up, we can get one, even if we need to move up a little bit. But we don't want to miss out on getting what we think is a premier playmaker.
I'm with you. Give me playmakers, give me points. Pete Smith, as always, great stuff. Appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much, Pete.
Thanks for having me.
Pete Smith, make sure you check him out. Really good Brown stuff. He writes for the Orange and Brown Report. It's going to do it for this edition of Sports for CLE. We will see you back here tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Have a great night, everybody. See you tomorrow at 4 on Sports for CLE.